Okay, so I think that we should be live, which is fun. Cool. Firstly, I just wanted to welcome everyone to the panel. This is Talk Like Everyone's Listening, Conversations in Podcasts as part of the Digital Writers Festival 2016. Before we start, I just wanted to do an acknowledgement of country. So I acknowledge the first Australians as the traditional custodians of the continent, whose cultures are among the oldest living creatures in human history. I pay respect to the elders of the community and extend my recognition to their descendants who are present. And I also just wanted to mention before we get started that you can ask questions as we're going along. There's a couple of ways you can do it. The two best ways to do it are on Twitter using the hashtag DWF16, and we'll be following along that hashtag and be answering your questions. We might do it as we go. We might do it at the end. We'll see how our conversation goes. Otherwise, if you're watching this on YouTube rather than on the Digital Writers Festival website, but if you are on the Digital Writers Festival website, you can just click through. To the right of your YouTube screen, there will be a live chat, and you can chat with us there and ask us questions, and we will answer them. And I just want to say no question is too, I don't want to say the word basic, but I think that I asked quite a few people like what kind of things they'd want to know out of a panel like this, and a lot of people were like, I have no idea where to even start. So there's no question that is too at the beginning of the process if you're someone who's interested in doing podcasting. Cool. So with us today, we are very excited to be joined by Miles Martignoni and Sophie Overett. I'm going to read out their bios. So Miles leads audio strategy at Guardian Australia as their podcast producer and also teaches their podcasting masterclasses. He also convenes digital audio production at Macquarie University and is the special project manager at 2SER 107.3, where he directs podcast and digital content development. He has taught journalism and online media at Sydney and Wollongong universities, as well as at the Australian Film, Television and Radio School. He has produced radio for ABC Local and Radio National, as well as developing audio projects for businesses and non-for-profit organisations, including City of Sydney, the WWF, the NRL, and Cosmopolitan magazine. And we are also joined by Sophie Overett. Sophie is a writer and cultural producer from Brisbane, Australia. Hello! Her writing has been published in journals and anthologies around the world. In 2015, she was a Queensland Literary Fellow, a participant in the Tin House Summer Writers Workshop in Portland, Oregon, and her YA manuscript, Agatha Abel Meets Her Maker, was shortlisted for the Text Prize. In 2016, her novella, They Built Us Out of Varied Things, will be published by Tiny Owl Workshop. She is one half of Lady Parts, which is a podcast about women's roles in genre, cinema, and blogs at sophieoverett.com. And even though I am hosting this panel, I have been told that I should also tell everyone who I am. So I'm Anna Easley. I will save you my bio and just say, well, the first sentence says I am a writer, podcaster, and professional feeler of feelings. I do a lot of different stuff, but in terms of this panel, probably the most relevant experience is that I have been doing a podcast with my ex-fiance who's living in Canada for about a year now. We do it every week. And I'm in pre-production for a new podcast called Starving Artist, which is about art and money and talking to creatives about how they manage those two things. Cool. I feel like that's all the intro stuff. And so now we'll just get into the funky, delicious questions. First of all, I actually just wanted to get everyone, each of us, to introduce like what they do because I know we just read out people's bios, but it's kind of like, like what does the specifics and what does that look like? Because I think it will look a bit different for each of us. Yeah. So who wants to go first? Oh, I can't hear Miles.
No, I'm back.
There you go. Yeah.
I'm back first.
Do you want to go first, Miles?
All right, fine. I'll go first. So, how did I get into it all? I guess, and the podcast I work on.
Yeah.
Well, I guess it all kind of started in community radio. Like a lot of people, I volunteered at a local station, and that's kind of how my love affair with audio began. I was just playing like probably horrible indie music late at night in a suburban station. And after I did that for a while, I picked up some audio subjects at uni, and then I started volunteering at bigger stations, like 2SER, two of the larger ones that broadcast all over the city. And then I went to afters and did a really intense year of broadcast training. Went off to work, came back, did some teaching, kind of found myself at The Guardian. And at The Guardian, I produce all of their podcasts here in Australia.
How long have you been at The Guardian for? Just out of interest.
So what happened was probably about 2 they were doing a series of kind of writers and videographers and audio people to every one of the city festivals, so like Sydney Festival, Melbourne Festival, things like that. And so I was picked up as a freelancer to make podcasts. It was really like a whole week, and what I would do is I would basically get up, we'd have a meeting at 10 a.m, and then by like 11 o'clock at night, I would have finished the entire podcast, and I did it for 7 days.
Wow.
That's how I started at The Guardian. And then through a number of, I mean, I could talk about this for ages, but eventually I was brought on part-time, but I'm slightly less part-time than I was before, if that makes any sense.
Yes, I know that feeling.
And so at The Guardian, we started making a show called Token, which was all about race and culture in Australia and kind of the issues surrounding that. We took the most diverse cast of characters we could find in the office and had them all talk about both their personal feelings towards it and also interview other people about it. And that's now where they've expanded it to also look at sort of LGBTIQPA kind of issues as well. And now we're rolling out a politics podcast from Canberra, which is recorded by them there, put it together in Sydney. And we also have this other podcast called Behind the Lines, which is just kind of changed. It started as a behind kind of journalism and stories, and then it kind of became a during the election, and I'm still trying to figure out what it is right now.
Yeah, the format of that one seems to change a little bit in different episodes.
It's great because it gets anything you want, but I think it needs a format that is as it just podcasts need to kind of be somewhat in format, somewhat they do, and it's definitely not what that is at the moment. That's a great playground thing or doing conversations or cutting like a cool feature for it. It's a great Australia at the moment, and I think it'll settle into a regular format early next year again.
Yeah. Cool. Thanks, Miles. Sophie, would you like to give us a bit of a rundown about what you get up to in podcasting land and what that looks like for you? I can't hear you, Sophie. I still can't hear Sophie.
So if you go to the cog in your settings, see what it says in your microphone. Find from default built microphone to speak. Otto, why don't you tell us a bit about your podcast?
Yeah, I was just going to say, while Sophie's working out her audio, I'll just talk a little bit about what I'm doing. And I just want to say thanks already to Casper on Twitter, who's been asking a few great questions that we'll get to later. So in terms of podcasting, in I think November or December last year, my ex-fiance was like, I've got a great idea. Let's start a podcast. And I was like, well, I'm not completely sold on that idea. I think that it might be terrible and no one would listen to it. But I said that I would do a few episodes. So I have a bit of a background in sound engineering for working out all of the technical stuff. But I kind of want to mention that I don't know that much stuff. I'm a bit of a hack. But since then, we've been putting out an episode a week for almost a year. We're about to come up to our anniversary. And I think we're going to do an anniversary episode where I do an episode with my ex-fiance's new partner. The podcast is kind of strange. It's very conversational based, and it's called Being Honest with My Ex, only because we just started doing it. And then I think the first episode, he told me that I wasn't the person that he's loved the most. And in the second episode, I told him that I didn't actually really ever think he was that sexy. And so then we were like, oh, so we have a kind of thing of being sort of brutally honest. Maybe that's what it should be called.
Brutally honest.
Yeah. So that's what we do there. And we kept going because just a lot of people kept listening and emailing us and telling us that it was good. We've been called the most awkward podcast in the history of podcasts. And I don't think that that's far off the mark. But at the moment, I'm also working on another project called Starving Artist, which I mentioned before is conversations with people about art and money. And so at the moment, I'm in pre-production, but I've interviewed a bunch of people across a wide range of topics, like Steve Rogenbach, who's a video poet who was just out in Australia recently. Bri Lee, who's just before she got her first big book deal. And I actually interviewed my ex for that one because he had just finished a Kickstarter where he made $87,000 for a card game. And I can't remember the other ones. But I think I've done about 7 or 8 interviews, and I kind of want to release them. But it's interesting because it's a whole different kettle of fish in terms of doing an interview style podcast versus doing like one that's 2 people over and over again. Anyway, that's a bit about me. Sophie, do we have you?
We do that, Sophie.
Oh no, I still can't hear Sophie.
I still can't hear Sophie. Okay, so you're pushing and muting on. Hey, it's Sophie.
Hello. Sorry, sister.
There you are. Oh, you're on mute again.
No, she's gone.
You're going on and off mute, like very rapidly.
A moment. What did our master tech wizard do?
I'll leave.
On the big screen.
Okay.
You're back.
My
No,
back.
she's gone. And back. Yes, I can hear you now.
Cool. Can you hear me now?
Sophie, yes, we can hear you.
Yes, great. Okay, cool.
Yay!
Yay, we got there eventually. So
We did.
yeah, I started at Queensland Writers Centre straight out of uni, and I worked my way up. I started out as customer service, and then really worked my way up through to content production for the organisation. And a part of that was learning how to podcast. And I did a few little podcasts there, but it wasn't really substantial stuff. But I really kind of got a taste for it and got a sense of what producing and production, and really liked it and enjoyed it. And at the time, I was working with Amy Lindorf, who was our project manager, or program manager rather. And we hit it off, and she'd had this idea for a podcast about exploring the way women operated in genre cinema, which is a topic that I was really interested in as well. So from there, we kind of started to develop a plan for exploring that in a broader spectrum and a broader scale. And so Lady Parts was born, and we've been doing it for about a bit more ad hoc than we'd like, I think. But I think that's part of cultural production generally, is that life can get in the way.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but we've really enjoyed doing it, and we've had a really good response from people. People seem to be enjoying listening to it, so hopefully that continues.
Cool. Thank you very much, Sophie.
It's a great podcast. I just want to say it's a great podcast. I really like it.
Yeah, it's a good one. I actually wanted to start off by talking a little bit about practical stuff like equipment, and get people to talk about what equipment they actually use. Just because when I was asking people what they wanted to know, there was a bit of a like, what do I buy? And it can be really confusing researching. So if you could tell me like what equipment do you use, and then maybe a bit around if you have ideas around where people could get information around what they should be looking at if they're interested in getting equipment. Or if there's anything that you're like, definitely get this. So, Miles, I might get you to go first on that one.
Me? You sure? Because I'll talk more than both of you about equipment.
Yeah, I thought you might.
So like you two should start, and we'll gradually go up to things
up to professional podcast producer for The Guardian. Okay, Sophie, do you want to go?
I'm also really curious.
Yeah, sure. I'm pretty basic as far as equipment goes. I think it's important to get a good microphone. I think that's probably the number one tip I'd have for people looking at need and what they want to use. I have a Blue Yeti microphone, which I'm really happy with. I think especially if you're starting out, making sure that you've got a USB microphone that does well with more than one voice speaking is the most important thing to be worrying about. And otherwise, I just use Audacity for editing, which I find really good, solid editing software, which makes it even better.
Cool.
It's got all these different polar patterns. I know, like you can change the shape of the way it picks up audio. Are you using that? It does like a figure eight where it does two circles on either side of it. Is that what you're using in your podcast?
Yeah, I am. Yeah, that's the one.
Yeah. Thanks, Sophie. So in terms of mine, it's pretty easy. It's actually just stuff that I had left over from doing different projects. So I don't have a USB microphone. I use a Rode NT1A condenser microphone and a Focusrite Scarlett 2i2 USB interface. And then I use that with Logic Pro. So, but these, like I was kind of at the advantage of already having all of these things at hand because I had done some recording before. But the thing that I really like about Logic Pro, and I'm definitely not an expert, but I've tried a few different things, is that it has a strip silence feature, which we use a lot for editing. And what that means is that you can just select the whole hour-long audio file and then take out all of the pieces of silence like in a second. Because most of what the editing involves is just squishing everything a lot. so that we sound way smarter than we actually are. But because the podcast that I record is with someone who's in Canada, we record over Skype, and then we both record separate audio files, and then we put them in Dropbox, and then one of us syncs it and edits it. But he actually uses, I think he uses just a Zoom portable audio recorder, and so you can tell that his audio is worse than mine, but it doesn't matter. Like, it annoys me. I don't think it annoys most people. But yeah, so that's what we've had at our disposal. Yeah. But if I was going to go again, I'd probably go with what Sophie said or what Miles says. Miles, what about you?
When it comes to making your own podcast, I think the most important thing is actually just to start making it on anything.
I agree.
Like, a lot of people worry a lot about the equipment, but like, you can do a lot with your phone these days. There's these little lapel mics you can buy. They're like $60-$70. And I've actually sent for to have never into the field with like 10 minutes with like pretty good audio to people. Then all they did was they actually held the lapel and used it like an actual mic. It was hilarious. And so you can start with something like that into your phone. It was a little Zoom look like your ex might be using. I started with that, and then I bought a bigger Zoom recorder, and the leaping quality where, like, when you use those Focusrite cones with like those XLR plugs, which you can plug straight into like gear, like that's when you're moving into more professional gear. And so as you move up with recorders, you can buy a recorder with like 2 XLR inputs at the bottom usually. And that's a great starting space because your recorder has microphones on it, but it has these plugs. So, a year later, hey, I'm going to buy it into the recorder. So these days I'm recording with a Tascam recorder with 6 inputs. I'll just, I can't play, so let me just something. Let me stick screen share on.
Sweet.
Share this thing here. Just using Audition here. So you should be able to see that there's these separate tracks along here. And you can see I've got Gabrielle, Bridie, and Lucy here. And so with this Tascam recorder, it's got lots of plugs in, and I've plugged multiple microphones into it. And I've put each of them on a separate kind of track. And that's how I get around having to record in horrible concrete-lined rooms at the Guardian offices to try and make it sound a little bit less echoey, is by having this extra control by the kind of multiple channel way.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
And then I've used the Audacity program. I use Audition because a lot of people come to me from workplaces and want to make podcasts and don't realize that they probably already have Audition because it's part of the Adobe Creative Cloud. So, yeah, and most of them have a license for the workplace, and they just use Photoshop and like one other program, and so they can use Audition as part of that package. So that's usually one that they go to. But I trained when I did the radio subject at uni. They taught us on Pro Tools, which is like a hugely complicated program that I recommend no one ever go near unless they want to be a sound engineer. Yeah. So does that kind of answer questions? Microphone-wise, I really like plug-in mics. Like I've been using like handheld Sennheiser cardioid mic for a lot of stuff, but I've really been using a Rode NTG shotgun microphone, tube. It's more directional. Like most of the podcasts in America use shotgun
Yeah.
microphones to record their audio. But I've picked up that a lot of them are starting to use lapels with like wireless lapels, because they just clip them on talent and recorded. So that's kind of like, I'd like to get one of those, but I don't really have $1,000 to drop on a single microphone at the moment.
Yeah, totally. And I think that's a really good point that you don't, I think that there's this idea that you should be using something like Pro Tools if you want to be a professional, but I mean, I did a course in Pro Tools and I haven't touched it since because it's just so overly complicated and I do not need that kind of headache. And things like Audacity that are free, or that Audition that a lot of workplaces will already have.
Here in Australia, I'm just in the studio. No one's using Pro Tools. Like ABCs, you know who uses Pro Tools? That's the only place. No one else in the ABC uses Pro Tools. You know, I'm pretty sure Mamma Mia make their podcast on Audition, like in Pro Tools. But in America, a lot of production places are using Pro Tools, mainly because they all kind of peaked when Pro Tools away kind of free journal kind of version. So they've all been. There's a couple of new programs that are really good. One's called Reaper, like the Grim Reaper, and it's very cheap or pretty much free. And it's got heaps of tutorials now, called the Hindenburg Journalist, which is pretty much been created so that people who don't know anything about audio can edit audio. And that one is like really easy to use, really simple, and also has like heaps of tutorial videos.
Yeah, I think Hindenburg was created for journalists who are now moving more into like podcast reporting. Is that right? I thought that that's kind of where the link was. I don't know.
I think so. It's named Hindenburg because apparently that Hindenburg disaster is like first evidence of kind of live reporting, because they had one recording their Hindenburg and then it burst into flame, and the recording is amazing. Like if you go and find that, like it's an amazing recording. This reporter tried to report on this huge flaming like Zeppelin. Like it's crazy.
Wow. That's scary. So let's get into it. I wanted to ask first up, Miles, you suggested this question. What do you think makes a great conversation? And I suppose that then it's like, how do you know if your podcast is actually a good idea? Yeah, do you guys have any thoughts on this? I think, Miles, you've had a lot of experience in working with a lot of different people with different dynamics.
Yeah, but I think it's like an everyday kind of thing. But so, yeah, like I want to hear from Sophie. Like when I listen to your podcast, like it can be really engaging, and I like how the two of you just have this, like you go back and forth, and it's fun. Like how do you know when you're onto something with that?
Yeah, I often find conflicts the key, whether it's between Amy and my differing opinions, or whether we both, or conflict, I guess, with the things that we're reviewing or talking about. So I definitely think conflict's the key thing. Honor, I think that's one of the reasons I like to your podcast so much as well. Is you have, and when I say conflict, I don't necessarily mean like fighting or arguments, but I guess a different way of seeing things, which makes for a compelling conversation. And I think I definitely got that out of your podcast as well.
That's because me and my ex disagree on almost everything.
Yeah, so I think conflict's probably key for conversation, but making sure it's not manufactured, and I guess making sure it's light and shade as well is how you get around that. So there are always going to be things I think that you agree on, but making sure you don't agree on everything and not being afraid of disagreeing, I guess, and disagreeing with the things that you're talking about in conversation. Yeah.
Thanks, Sophie. I think another good thing to add to that is surprise and curiosity. I love it when you're hearing particularly conversational podcasts where it sounds like one of the hosts is actually learning something, or is curious about why something happened in a particular way. But maybe that's also because I like people being curious about the world, and so I like creating conversations that are curious. I think like that's something I can really get behind. And
Yeah,
Mom,
I mean, you're both right. I think surprise is really hard to manufacture. Like, a podcast called Reply All, which is kind of conversations, but the core of it is the two hosts talking to each other about a topic and playing tape. And I watched one of them at a festival, and he said the only way it could sound real is that we research our own stories and we don't tell each other about them until we go into the studio. So they actually go into the studio, and that's the first time you hear that tape. Now, I'm sure there's more editing afterwards, but it was really interesting to hear that they just like work stories almost secretly in order to get that sense of genuine curiosity in that studio.
There's with the podcast that I do, both me and my co-podcaster have a list of things to tell each other on the podcast. Because, and we can tell why, because he retold me a story that I'd already heard 3 times, and my response was, that's kind of boring. And he got really upset. So it's weird because, I don't know, in terms of our relationship, we now have all these things that we only tell each other kind of in public. But it creates that thing of like surprise and a genuine reaction, which you like the Reply All guys know, you just can't get otherwise.
Yeah.
No, I agree. Sorry.
So Sophie, do you and your co-podcaster Amy keep your views on the films that you'll be looking at private until the recording day?
Actually don't watch the film together. What we found is that the first couple we did, we went and saw the films together, and we found that afterwards we'd talk about it. And conversations, and we're not really sure what the other one thinks about it. And I think because your opinion does get shaped by something with, and by talking about it with friends and family. So we try to keep relatively pure now and try to make sure that we're seeing it differently. And we'll have certainly, both of us will have notes that we kind of bring to a recording session, but we otherwise try to keep it relatively fresh and flowing.
Do either of you have any other tips? I think that's a great idea in terms of making notes. I was just wondering if you guys had any other tips or ways that people prepare to kind of make sure that you have enough stuff already to make sure that there's content, but also keeping it sort of improvised and interesting.
Well, I've seen a lot of conversations that are like sound really natural. In fact, like almost overplanned in a way. How your team works as well. I think the very least you need some kind of plan. If you know of where you're heading often, particularly if you're talking about a subject, then it can really help like make that conversation seem like, oh, it flowed really well. But then you kind of leave the contents of those boxes like to be spontaneous. And then, of course, you can go off plan if you need to. But often that's the way I work. Like at The Guardian, I don't script anyone. Like I feel like I should sometimes, but I just points, or I sit in front of them and I'm like, you should say this, and have them repeat it and look at me, and I'm like, no, look at me, and smile when you say it. Like it's really like I try and really like kind of break down, because it's really hard for someone who isn't like a superstar radio presenter to read something that sounds like scripted. So like I'm like, no, say it again, more happier to it. Yeah. So any moment that needs to kind of be semi-scripted, I try my best to kind of remove as much of the formal scripting as possible, and kind of either have them say it back to me in their own words or not. And sometimes it works really well, and other times it doesn't work great. Yeah. So yeah, I'd say having a plan is really useful.
And
Sophie,
Sophie, it sounds like
Yeah.
you guys have a bit of a plan like that.
Yeah, I totally agree with Mike. I think it's really important to have a plan. I don't think we script certain parts of our introduction and outro is scripted, and we'll have the description of the film scripted. But pretty much everything else is either just dot points or one word prompts. But I do think it's very important, especially if you're coming into something with like a conversational review like we do on Lady Parts. I think it's really important to know the angle that you're coming from and the angle that you're wanting to hammer home, because if you don't, then it's kind of going to become a bit of a woods almost. And you might have the point that you originally want to get across lost. So I even find just having one-word prompts really helps me, and having a notebook and paper there while I'm podcasting too. Sort of something comes to me, I can scribble it down and make sure that I come back to it without interrupting Amy when she's talking too. Which again, I think or more.
Yeah, totally.
That you can help each other, like the group can help each other in order to, like, if you kind of know where you're heading, one person can kind of start that segue in a way, and then the next one can pick it up. And it sounds like it was a natural segue, but in actual fact, you kind of meant to go there. And as long as you don't do the thing of, well, we were going to speak about this anyway, so let's get into it now. As long as you don't make people aware of that, like, it just sounds like, wow, that's made it a great conversation. But it's because you kind of thought about the best things to talk about beforehand, and then,
yeah.
And segue handoff.
The podcast I do with my ex is pretty unplanned, so we don't really have that much of a plan, but we do have a list of topics that we'd like to talk about at some point. And we also record a warm-up, which is like, I don't know, 10 minutes beforehand of us just sort of whatever. And sometimes that conversation will get onto something, and before we go anywhere, we'll be like, okay, let's just stop now, and then we'll like do it again. Or there'll be bits that we edit out in the episode of like, oh, okay, so this conversation could go here or it could go here. Which way do you think we should take this? That no one else hears. It just sounds very natural. And in terms of interviewing other people, other thing I do is I always do a like pre-recording phone call. And because the podcast I do is about art and money, it often involves asking really invasive questions to get a feel for how comfortable this person is about talking about money. It's just because it can be quite a taboo topic, and it's better to like gauge where someone's at and be like, hey, like, are you comfortable talking about how much you earned last year, or are you comfortable talking about this, before we get to actually recording. So that then I know as an interviewer where, like, what to interview for them and for us. Yeah.
Interviews are really tricky. Yeah. That pre-interview technique is a really, really good idea. Like talking to them beforehand, because what can also happen, they might not be able to talk at all. Like they might be horrible talent. They just might not be able to like in an interview. So often when it comes to radio and training people, I'm often like, you should talk to them before you lock them in for, because you need to make sure that they can speak well as well. With interviews, I find one of the main mistakes people make when recording them is like phone. They might hold it like all the way over to the side because they're too shy to put that microphone right into someone's face. But I want some. So a friend of mine managed to have dinner with Ira Glass and a few people.
What?
Making a late show, and so they were like, "Oh, can we get some advice? How can we record this?" And Ira was like, "Okay, yeah, you can record it." And so he held the microphone out, and Ira Glass was like, "What are you doing? You're not going to get good sound like that. No, you need to shove it in my face. No, get it right in there." And he started berating him for not holding the microphone close enough to someone's face. And it's really because you feel awkward, but you just got to do it. You need to
absolutely
forget about the microphone. You just get it in there. Like I tell them it's got to be close, And then I look them in the eye and I try and engage them like with my eyes or something, and forget about that microphone. And the best thing I found is I tell them not to worry about the microphone and to talk to me, because people will try and talk directly into the microphone. Like if they don't know anything about mics, they'll try and talk like this into it. And that's actually really bad for the microphone. So I just say, talk to me, microphone where it needs to be. And that, I think, also helps put them at ease, because all of a sudden they're not worried about it as much. They're just having a conversation, and you do your best to try and make them forget about that mic.
Yeah, totally. I also find it difficult to prepare people, and particularly people who haven't really spoken into microphones before. I always give them a little rundown, and one thing I say is like, you will be edited to make you sound better. So if you need time to answer a question, you can take as much time as you want. If you say something and then you're like, oh, I didn't mean that, you can just say the thing again, and I will edit it over. Although that's not really natural for people to talk like that, so people often don't use that if they're not used to being interviewed. We're gonna go to some questions in a moment, but first, there's two questions that I wanted to ask of you guys. One is, what are you listening to at the moment that you really like, and which podcasts are you looking up to in terms of what you're trying to do? Sophie, do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. I'm listening to two podcasts pretty obsessively at the moment. I'm listening to the Law podcast about folklore. So each episode kind of takes a different look at things. So it's everything from our walls, haunted lighthouses, kind of looking at the historical implications of that, and what the origins of those folklore stories came from. So that's one that I love. And the other one, a true crime podcast. I listen to a lot of true crime podcasts, but In the Dark is one that I listen to a lot, which is currently one which is about his name's going to completely escape me right now, so I'm going to awkwardly look it up. But it's a podcast about a little boy who went missing in the 80s and about the subsequent fallout of the police investigation. So it's terrific as well. If you like true crime podcasts, I'd really recommend that. Ones that I look at for lady parts, probably How Did This Get Made, which is a really, really much funnier than my podcast, but has that same sort of sense of diving into film reviews and exploring what film looks like. And the other one's another true crime podcast, which might sound a bit weird given we don't look at true crime at all on lady parts. Which is kind of two girls just talking about murder cases that they were obsessed with growing up.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, there's a really cool rhythm to it, and they're good friends like me and Amy are, and my co-host, and so that gives me a good kind of indicator on tone, and it's good to listen to that to get a sense of what people might be hearing, I guess, when they hear me and Amy ramble about things. Yeah, those are my...
Thanks, Sophie. Miles, do you have podcasts you are imitating?
Yeah, too many. I mean, so I just check my app. I'm subscribed to 257 different podcasts, but I definitely don't listen to them all because I work in a space. I just subscribe to anything that someone says is good, and then I listen to a couple of episodes at least, and then I'll be honest, they just like I never go back to it. So going back to though are often quite different to the work I make because I spend hours listening to conversations. Like I really like to something like if we're talking about true crime, I really like Criminal. Like it's my favorite show. It's just such a beautiful show because it's not like grim and gritty crime. It's like these really personal stories. And like, you know, there's an episode about a giant tree that got poisoned, and I'd never felt so emotional about a tree as I had listening to that podcast. And another one about like a dog, like a police dog, and I never felt like my heart like wept for this poor family, like, and his relationships with the other dogs and the owner. Oh yeah. So I love Criminal, and then I really like listening to Reply All and Radio Lab and 99% Invisible. And all these stuff, like I'm liking to see the new season of SBS True Stories, which is all a true crime series. It focuses on a lot of spate of gay hate murders that happened in Adelaide. And it's done in an interesting way with a journalist retelling stories, and they've layered all these sound underneath it to kind of like build a picture in your head of what's happening there. Those are the kinds of things I'm enjoying.
Cool, thank you. In terms of what I'm looking at, I am also subscribed to so many podcasts that I also, a lot of them I haven't listened to. I really like pretty much everything from Gimlet Media, which is Criminal, which Mars just mentioned, Reply All, Startup, the first season was excellent. Science Versus is also really great. They have quite a few. You should check out Gimlet Media. And also, like Better Off Dead, which is the Andrew Denton one. Oh my God, heartbreak. Millennial, which is a really amazing podcast that was started by a young woman in America who's really was just only out of university, and she's just freaking aced it. She also talks a lot about the process of podcasting while she's making the podcast. So it's a really nice way of looking at some of the complexities or how to do things. And she's got one episode just about getting advertising, which is kind of cool. Yeah, lots of shows like that. In terms of ones that are kind of like what I do, there's a podcast called This Feels Terrible, which is by Erin McGathy, and it's a conversational podcast where she interviews different people about relationships. And what's kind of amazing is that she's like documented her marriage and divorce through the podcast. She's married to Dan Harmon, who's the creator of Community, and their relationship is also documented through this other podcast called Harmontown, which has been going on for quite a few years, which is Dan Harmon, but she was in it a lot. And also shows like Hello Internet, which is more of a really pragmatic show from CGP Grey, who's the YouTuber, and this other guy that I can't remember his name. Yeah, lots of really good podcasts. Cool. I think that we should go to take some questions that are on the Twitter at the hashtag. If you want to ask a question, we'll see how we go. The hashtag is DWF16. Let's have a look at what we have been asked. I think Casper Roxberg has asked quite a few questions. Let me see. Is it good to record more than you need and cut it down, or better to have a cold conversation for authenticity? So basically, like, how much do you think that you should edit out a conversation?
I'll take this one.
You guys, yeah.
You can always make everything better with editing. As much as having a real conversation is important, the podcasts that do it the best like have a lot of editing, but it takes time. It honestly comes down to the time you have. If you're editing an hour worth of conversation, it's going to take you at least 3 hours to do it, but you could spend a whole day on that, really. So when we were recording Token, or like the Guardian Culture podcast, the Culture podcast was a 4-person conversation. They talk for an hour or more than an hour, and I'd edit it down to about 45 minutes. So I'd cut almost half of it out of it. It made for a more engaging conversation because I just took out stuff that was either repetitive or stayed on the issue for too long. And I think it made it a better conversation, personally. And at the Guardian, like, my editor always like, let's be shorter. Why is it so long? Make it shorter. But I think it can be the wrong instinct sometimes, but really well. There's an example of when we did an episode of Behind the Lines, and it was all based around this incident when the opinion editor had been at a restaurant and was groped by like another man, and she talked about the story, and so there's a great piece to talk about feminism. And in the piece, they started talking about Christina Keneally's columns and how she is a female writer that doesn't do a lot of abuse online. And then they brought up this issue of getting abuse online when they write things, and then back to Christina Keneally, and then later on, and it was really good. So in that one, I took when they did their segue to a different issue, like I cut out when they went back to the other issue, and I went straight to the part where they discussed the same issue further down. That like they just segued naturally into a new place. But the actual conversation had all these other bits and pieces that didn't flow as well necessarily. So that's an example of what you can do with editing. Sophie, do you do any editing on your podcast?
Yeah, we do. So usually we record for about an hour and a half, and I'll try to edit it back as close to an hour as I can. There are exceptions to that. I find we can get a bit repetitive because it is a pretty conversational podcast, and especially if we both have, because we've got our notes there, we'll often towards the end go over points again just to make sure we've got everything we want to. I don't usually chop and change it too much. But yeah, I definitely edit. I definitely cut out repetitiveness. I cut out points sometimes because occasionally we can go on tangents. Because we record it usually at Amy's house. Occasionally there's dogs barking in the background. So yeah, I think I usually give us a bit of a buffer sound-wise. So I'm usually editing between 15 minutes to half an hour out of every episode.
Yeah. With the podcasts we usually go through like a first edit, which is like just squish it all together, take out anything that's really obvious, and then go back through and then be like, okay, what of this is really boring and can we take it out, and does it still make sense? So it can actually take a really long time. But I think that's one thing that I definitely did not really think about enough when I was like, yeah, I'll do that thing, because it can take a really, really long time.
Just like if you have time to do that first edit of like crunching it, and then the second one of let's listen to it and when do I get bored. That's the same method that all of the big American podcasts use. They just sit in a room with like 10 people, play their episode, and they all take notes about when they get bored. And that's how they make a really good podcast.
There's another question that I just remembered. Someone asked me on Instagram that I think is probably really good. It's a bit off the topic, but what do you guys think about trying to get people to listen to your shows? Have you guys had particular success? You're in a bit of a different position, Miles, because you're working with The Guardian, but I know that you're going to be doing an independent project. And then how do you go about promoting, particularly a conversational podcast?
Yeah, I think distributing through multiple markets. We try to have a lot of Twitter engagement with various kind of like-minded organizations. We are looking at doing kind of branded events and stuff, so we'll see how that goes. But yeah, definitely. I mean, I think marketing is one of the tricky things with podcasts, especially now that the market's so saturated, I guess. And there's so many things out there. But we have developed a pretty solid listenership. Which is great. How about you, Anna?
To be honest, like some of the most successful strategies, because you can see like podcast stats aren't very good, but you can see like, you know, where stuff happens and where more people download. So a couple of things that I've noticed have really brought a lot more people has been, like I do a bit of writing for some places. So when I've written particularly successful articles, obviously that brings people back. So I wrote an article for Daily Life about like what I had learned from doing a podcast with my ex-fiance. And then I wrote another article about how he publicly proposed to me and that was the worst thing that's ever happened. And then I ended up on Sunrise talking about that. And then a lot of people came over to be like, who the hell is this and what is this thing? And the other thing was that's pretty common. I'm in a good position where I do a few different things, so that's quite helpful. But the other thing that people commonly do is feature on other people's podcasts. Earlier this year, Peter, who's my co-podcaster, featured on the podcast I mentioned before, This Feels Terrible. And after that happened, because that's such a popular podcast, we had a lot more people come and listen. And so a lot more people in America, actually, which was pretty cool. Yeah, so those things have helped. But I still kind of don't know in a bunch of ways. Miles, do you have any ideas?
I mean, that's all the right things to do. The number one way to get more listeners is to get yourself on another podcast, hopefully another more popular podcast. And that's what people keep saying. I think you'll find more podcast advertising. It's already starting to happen within some networks, but I'd see that as a big thing. Even at the end, go to not like, I'll just launch something and it instantly becomes a podcast smash hit, because the people who are on The Guardian aren't necessarily all podcast fans. And we've done research, and we've even got people who are Guardian readers who don't know we make podcasts sometimes. So,
yeah.
And I have trouble with it sometimes. It's a huge problem for everyone involved, and there's just so much out there. Yeah, for me, when I'm thinking about an independent project, I'm thinking about my communities of interest and where do they exist? How do I find them? So I'm trying to make something series based around themes of video games. And so I'm trying to think, okay, well, who am I trying to reach? Is it just random gamers or older gamers, or where do they live? What do they read? Figuring that out, can I get to write an article about it? Can I write for them? So I think when you're writing things elsewhere, you really need to think about who people who are listening to your podcast are, and that's just so successful because it's usually a similar podcast and they're already podcast fans. So it's the most effective way because you've got that double thing happening there. And everything else can work. But yeah, it's tough. I mean, in the podcast probably don't make enough money to be self-sustainable. It's just like anything creative. It's a big pyramid, and there's a lot of people at the bottom. So a lot of people should get known.
Yeah. Thanks, Miles. I think that's a really good point. I think we're going to wrap up really soon. But I just wanted to ask quickly, one last question. And thanks everyone for watching and contributing questions. I wanted to just get everyone to talk just a tiny bit about what their kind of ambitions are for what they're doing with their podcasts and where they'd like to see that go. And then we will end on that note. So who would like to go first, Miles or Sophie?
I'm happy
to go. Everyone. Okay.
Well, we're hoping to grow our listenership, but we are wanting to kind of expand into live events. So they're running screenings of female positive science fiction and fantasy films, and being able to kind of have conversations about it afterwards, which really invites more people to be able to talk about it. I mean, science fiction and fantasy is an area that we're so passionate about, and the reality is that there's a lot of kind of less than nice roles for women within the genre. So being able to spotlight ones that actually we think do a good job and to generate conversations off that would be kind of a dream, I think, of our podcast.
Yeah. Cool. That sounds great. Thanks, Sophie. And Miles, what are you going to do?
Yeah, well, I guess there's a couple of competing things. At The Guardian, I'm trying to build out a little network of podcasts here in Australia. So we've got two, and I'm kind of working at the moment that should see the light of day soon. So as it's working with the staff and who people are coming to me with ideas, and we get to develop them together. But at the moment, it's more about trying to figure out how to do it in a way that typically possible to them all. But yeah, that's what I really like about that. Working with other people, like a miniature little network. And then also my other time when I'm not freelancing, I'm trying to work on something a bit more highly edited, something where I get the time to really work on it. And the spaces which will give you weeks and weeks to work on a story. At the Guardian, I work on a few projects that I get to do that sometimes. I just really want to just sit in the editing suite and just edit. It's so great when you get into it. And the idea I'm upon is this whole thing. It's interesting because I'm trying to find human stories that relate to kind of games and kind of taking them seriously. Esports players around and asking them more about their lives than the game. I had one of them tour their fridge and explain how they're coding for the team. Like all they do is play video games all day. It's such an insane existence. And, I'd like to find little stories like that. Tell them in a creative way. That's what I really, really want to do.
Yeah, cool. That sounds good. Thanks, Miles. And I suppose I'll say, I think my ambitions are pretty haphazard, I think. I kind of accidentally started podcasting. And now I'm interested in asking questions that it's difficult to find answers to, which I think is where I'm going with Starving Artist. In terms of the podcast I do, Being Honest with My Ex, I think that is a very strange podcast. There is still a lot more for us to unpack about our very strange relationship. But we'll see. We'll see how we go with that. I think next year we're planning on trying to get Peter potentially back over to Australia to do some fringe shows together, which would be fun. But I also have just other weird random ideas. Like I see podcasting as this cool. The intimacy of audio is quite extreme and something that I've learned through the process of making a podcast. And I think that there's other creative ways of utilizing that. In particular, like things like doing like a very strange meditation and recording it every day for a month. Like just, I like to do kind of the weird like time-based projects like that. And yeah, just whatever takes my fancy. I sound so loose. Yeah, cool. All right. Well, we are going to wrap it up there. Thank you, everyone who has come in and watched, who's shared some questions on Twitter, on the YouTube chat. Thank you very much, Sophie and Miles. Really appreciate all of your wisdom. And keep up the podcasting.
Well, you too.